Hi, I'm Guy Berry, and this is the Optimistic American Book Club. Today we're going to be discussing Atomic Habits by James Clear. If you haven't read the book, the best way for you to get value out of this is to download that book or buy a copy through Amazon. We will share that link for you here. To subscribe to the Optimistic American Book Club, please click the link or go to the website optamerican.com, and you can subscribe to our newsletter and you will see future postings about books we will be reading. I have two great guests here to communicate on this book. So I've got Dr. Jessica Conlin joining us, who is a Chief Development Officer at a behavioral health company. And I've got the Honorable Paul Johnson, owner of Redirect Health and also founder of Optimistic American. So thank you for both joining today. Okay, so let's dive into the book, Atomic Habits. And when we think of atomic habits and the root word of atomic, the Latin description is indivisible particle, which think of an atom, very small. And when you look at your life, your career, what can you attribute? What habits do you feel that you built on top of, that you maybe started off small and started to grow, that you could look back and say, hey, this really helped me? What do you think, Jessica?
I think the first place that I would start would be mindset. And so being able to look at myself in the context of where I am in the world and my family, my work, my career, and recognizing which pieces that I have influence over and maybe which ones that I don't. And I think that can look different all the time depending on where you're at. But once I kind of decided, and I think that with the support of my parents, of course, that I could impact my world and what I wanted and what my goals were, that was, I think, just a value shift or just, a value development. And then within that, with who I am as a person, I have a very short attention span. And so I've had to, from being even a small kid, had to set things up in my environment to remind me so I could be successful. So little things like people set alarms, I make lists, and having things set in certain places. I'm very organized because I will forget. And so I've found over the years as I've gotten older is that I have to structure things in such a way and almost scaffold into those small pieces and those small bits, kind of like an atom, to make sure that I don't forget little pieces of whether it be my daily routine or if it's something that I need for work the next day. So I do a lot of setting things out the night before or making a list of what I want to accomplish in the next hour, the next day, or the next year or something like that, because I will absolutely lose track. And so I think initially thought about it, and this is before reading the book, initially thinking like, okay, I have to do all these things so I can keep my head straight. But then zooming out a little bit, recognizing those are habits that contribute to my success and probably hinder at some point, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But that's kind of how I've, and I think roughly shaped my progress and how I've kind of grown as a professional and as, I think, a regular person.
It's almost the necessity of needing to keep track of things, right?
Right.
It gets busy life and things flying by and, okay, what's my list? What do I need to stay on top of? And in the book, they get into that, right? They get into what are you using to track some of your habits? So Paul, same to you. What habits?
I never had any problem with ambition, and my life has always, since I was a young man, it has always been completely full. So full that I forget lots of things, right? So if I don't put my keys in the right place, forget about it. I might as well call an Uber to go to work because I'm not going to find them. They're just not going to show up. But what I found, when I first ran for city council, I was 23 or 24 years old. And I started going to these rubber chicken dinners. I knocked on 80,000 doors. I was in a district that I shouldn't have had any chance of winning. Again, I was 23 running against somebody that was much more established. I knew I'd work hard, and I did. I completely outworked them. But what happened was I went up to like 280 pounds, right? I was knocking on a lot of doors, but I was also going to all these rubber chicken lunches, these rubber chicken dinners, going out to breakfast, meeting with people, trying to raise money, get support, get interest groups who were behind me. And what I began to forget was me, taking care of me. So when I was 25, I created probably one of my first best habits. And in that, there are three that I have now done since I'm almost 63. So I've done them for whatever that would be, a very long time, 40 some years. Number one, at 6 o'clock, I work out. And believe me, there are times that I want to push that snooze button. So I take my alarm clock and I put it all the way in the bathroom, or now I put my phone in the bathroom so that I have to get up and walk to that phone to shut it off. I don't like hitting a snooze. I want to be able to get up and I want to get going. When I go do my run, I always reward myself when I'm done. I do coffee. I go meet with my friends who go run with me. And I've been doing it so long now. As you know, you've been with us on a bunch of them, hiking or running. We've got a pretty good group, and they're smart. They're fun to listen to. They're fun to talk to. Well, that's my reward. That's the reward that I get. When I leave, I always do two things afterwards. The first thing I do is I give thanks. I give thanks for the things in my life. I give thanks that I can still run. I give thanks that I have friends. I give thanks that I can still comprehend what it is that my friends are telling me. And the second thing that I do is I make my plan for the day. And my plan always includes a variety of things, but the big two are, I think about, okay, what is it that I have to do? And then what do I need to do for me, right? And for me, it usually is, I'm trying to create some new product, or trying to create a new company, or I'm trying to, I need to do something with my folks or with my children. And so I think about what are the things that I need to do for myself. I've always used a grid. And in the grid, what I do is I have in one corner of the grid, it's not important and not urgent. Well, that's television, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're going to do in that grid. And then of course you'll have an urgent and important. Well, the urgent and important, I always try to think about it as, look, I'm gonna do that. It's gonna happen. It's both urgent and important, so it's gonna happen. I don't really need to plan for it. For that matter, I don't really need to plan for urgent and not important, because if it's urgent, I'm gonna do it. If you don't pay your house bill, you're gonna be out on the street, so you pay the house bill. The ones that are hard are the ones that are important but not urgent, right? Going to visit my mom, who's 84 years old, making certain that I call my sons every day who are going to college in New York, or whatever it is that they may be doing, to make certain that I can stay connected. Make certain that I'm thinking about what does my business need, not what are the things that I have to do for my business, but what are the things that I want to do to be able to move it to the next step. Those habits I've been doing for a very long time. And I would say that first thing in the morning, making certain that I do those things and I do them religiously, far and away has aided me in not just, I don't know what a success is. That's hard to determine. To make certain that I'm living the life that I want to live.
Success is relative.
Mm-hmm.
It's relative to what each one of us interprets to be success.
All right, Guy, I have to ask you the same thing. So you run our Redirect Health. You're a manic at making certain that details are taken care of. There has to be a lot of habits in that. Tell me what yours are.
You know, one of the things that you touched on that is big, this one of the largest shifts I've seen is when I wake up, I start with daily gratitude. It's the first thing I do. And there's lots of studying and other people who will talk about doing daily gratitude, but it helps me set my mindset for the day. And so what am I thankful for the prior day? And what I typically focus on, the people or the things that upset me the prior day. What am I thankful in that situation? Because I want to reshape my mind to get that day going. So right off the bat, gratitude. From there, it's prayers. I do a daily gratitude, daily prayers, and then I go into, okay, what's my day? And I plan out my day. And every morning, that is what I do. And after that, when I go into my day, you know, the biggest thing, when we talk about lists, I have a tablet here in front of me. I keep everything organized on one place. If I have it in email or on paper or in something else, my habit has to be, I know that I will lose track of it. There's got to be one central point that I can find everything. So if it's on an email, I make note of it here. If it's, on a piece of paper I wrote down, I make note of it here. So at any given point, there's one place.
You've got to teach me this habit.
Yeah. And by doing that, I can keep track of everything, because there's a lot. There's a lot going on. I've got 2 young kids. You can't have 2 young kids, run a busy company, and keep track of all of that on multiple sources. It's just not going to work. So having a single point is the next biggest key. But I would say what keeps me happy, what helps me keep going each day, is that daily gratitude. It really is. That power of just reframing my mind every single day. I find a lot of enjoyment out of that.
I think especially when there is so much going on, whether parenting or work and things like that, it's easy to let those really hard moments that can sometimes be days or weeks or months, whether that's a professional thing or a personal thing, to kind of permeate everything. And I think making a habit of bringing intention to saying, wait, hold on, let me pause. And I like how you said that even in that maybe challenging moment, okay, what's something I can be grateful for? Because there's always something. I can take something away from this, or maybe I can bring this to the interaction or this to the challenge the next time around that will maybe make it go more smoothly. But I relate to both of you saying that, because I was thinking about it. Do I do that? And I'm like, actually, I do that a lot, quite a bit, to make sure I don't get bogged down in, because it's a slippery slope. It's the second you start kind of, I think, and that's where going back to having influence over your world, you almost relinquish control to these things when external stressors or internal stressors, when you start kind of stacking those, whether it's negative feelings or problems and things that happen, and then we're kind of handing it over to that, whatever that might be, that entity, and just saying, okay, now you're in charge, and I don't like that. I'd rather decide for myself, well, how am I feeling, and what's the intention that I'm going to have for that day, and not necessarily ignoring the feeling, because I think that's important to say, well, what's this frustration or stress telling me, because it helps inform what we do, but it should inform in a way that I think propels us forward versus kind of keeps us stuck, and it's hard to not be stuck.
I've met a lot of people. I've met people at the very top of their game, presidents of the United States, billionaire CEOs. And I've also mentored a lot of people, some of which have, had criminal records and that spent time in prison. And I've also watched some people who were friends of mine whose lives ended up becoming disasters. The key to both is they never happened from one big decision. There's no wealthy person that is self-made that, if they really look back on their life, would say, this was the one thing that did it. And I can promise you, people whose lives have become disasters that are on death row today, they didn't make it in one decision either. It's a bunch of little decisions stacked on top of one another. What I love about the book that you picked is it's talking about that. It talks about how it is that we can stack those things up, as you say, where they begin to make a difference in your life.
And I think that concept of little, right? There's an example in the book where it talks about an airplane. If you move it by a degree, how far the airplane can go off track, right? It can be hundreds and hundreds of miles. And so the stacking, how do you make sure you're stacking in the right direction? Because you could be creating a habit that's actually starting to push you in a bad direction, depending on what you call good or bad, right? But how do you have that awareness, right? What do you think, how do you have like a reflection? What tools do you use to reflect back, like, am I creating a bad habit here, or is this going down a good habit? Do you have any tools like that you've used?
I think it's having the awareness to pause for even just a brief, I think that takes a couple seconds, and to think about, okay, what is happening? How is this working? How am I feeling about it? Maybe how is my environment responding to it? And that sounds like a lot to run through, but I think when you do it internally, it can happen pretty quickly. I think when we don't pause to do that, that's how we end up veering off. And I think that's when we become too robotic in terms of, and I believe we talk about that in the book, is where you are doing things along the lines, and then you just kind of ended off way off track and you don't even realize it. So I think when you make a decision to develop a habit or maintain a habit, you have to weave into that the habit of doing a pressure test or a check-in, or a checkpoint to say, okay, how is this serving me? Is this making me the person I want to be? Is this driving me in the direction that I want to go? What about my family and all of those pieces? And I think that's sometimes the part that gets forgotten. I think the other part too, which I wanted to mention when you're talking about the small decisions, I think one of the reasons why this book is so attractive to really any person, no matter what they're doing or how they live, is that it takes something that seems insurmountable and makes it achievable. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why people don't create habits or bring intention, is because it seems they don't know how to break things down into small, digestible pieces. And it's also, you don't always see the payoff, which is where you have to pause at each small decision to recognize how is that pushing it forward, or where are we getting stuck? Because if you don't bring attention to it, then you don't recognize the progress, and then that's when people tend to give up, I think, too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key to motivation, right? Motivation has 3 steps. The first step of motivation is that you have to challenge yourself. You have to say, okay, here's something that I want to try to do. I like in this book that they talk about, don't challenge yourself for the end, challenge yourself for the beginning. I do think you have to start with the end in mind. I think that's really important, but it's creating the challenge up front that's going to make you take the first step. Then after you are challenged, you do need somebody who'll pat you on the back, right? And sometimes for some people, that just has to be themselves. That's tough. That's a lot harder. But having people who are encouraging you along the way helps. And then the third thing is you need to see growth. When you do those things back to back, you will be motivated. And if you have to motivate other people, if you can do those 3 things for them, you can make them motivated as well. I think on the question, what I would also add to it is that there are parts of our life that are important, and then there are things that we can do. But it relates to this concept of agency. Agency is the belief that the things and the actions that we take actually will determine our future. It's I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Revolving Door. It's a great movie where somebody goes into this revolving door, and if they go left, they ended up with one life. If they go right, they end up with a completely different life. Same person, same city, same everything else, but just the direction they picked made a difference. Well, we know the parts of our life. We know that we have a spiritual part of our life. And spiritual can be religion, but it also can be your connection to other people, connection to something greater than yourself. We know that we have our friends and our family. We know that we have our occupation. That plays a huge role in terms of what it is that we do. And then we have our intellectual pursuits, and we have our physical pursuits. Setting goals in each one of those areas can be incredibly helpful. And you also kind of know, like, if we were to sit down and say, well, I'm going to go to McDonald's today. You know that's a bad habit. You don't need to go read a book to know that. You already know that's a bad habit. You know you should eat more vegetables, and you probably should be eating more protein, and your food should be healthier. That's a habit. And it's really easy to lie to yourself. In fact, I think that's one of the single biggest ways that you can identify failure and success. People who tell the truth to themselves and people who lie to themselves. And the lying looks like they're almost self-sabotaging, right? Because they say, I'm going to diet today at lunch, but I'm just going to take a couple of those French fries, right? And the easiest way to avoid the French fries is try to make sure you don't sit down at a table where French fries exist. Sit down at a table where a different type of food exists. Again, you know that you should work out every day. I run. I can tell you I don't recommend running for most people. It's bad for your knees. It has lots of other issues. But walking is good. Riding a bike is good. Doing weightlifting is good. Yoga is great. But find some way every day to pack in an hour just to stay committed to it. And by the way, you will live longer if you exercise an hour a day. On your intellectual, reading, but you can watch podcasts, or you can watch things that will give you intellectual learning. You can take classes online today. There's amazing things that you can do there. On your family and friends, that's time. And for somebody like me, my calendar, there isn't an hour during the day that isn't full. Not a single hour. Well, something's suffering in that. And if I don't take the time to make certain that I plug in the people that I care about, I know one of my biggest bad habits. I prioritize things that really aren't the most important things in my life, right? I love my business. I love politics. I love what we're doing with the Optimistic American. And as much as I love them, they're not the most important parts of my life. It's your children, your brothers, your sisters, it's your family members. That sense of connection will last you a long period of time, but you have to put effort into it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the habits I actually worked on as I was reading this book is my mindset throughout the day. And so I have an alarm now that goes off at 8 in the morning, and it says, it says crushing time, which means get to work. And then I've got a 6 p.m. alarm that goes off, and the 6 p.m. alarm says super dad, amazing husband. And so those two alarms, I'm being intentional for just what you talked about. And I started to test that as I was reading this book to say, okay, how would this change my mindset? And it actually has been nice, because what I find is I could be coming home at 5 or 5:30, driving home, and I'm thinking about a lot of things at work. And then at 6 o'clock, that alarm goes off, and I put my phone away, put my work stuff away. Okay, you're here to be super dad, amazing husband. What can I do to do those things? And so even just a cue like that, like an alarm or something, can be
I'd like to
really
know what
impactful.
you guys think is the worst habits. And I'm going to give you what I think is the worst habit. My dad used to say to me all the time when I was growing up, I would be moody or I was a teenager, right? So I would do those things that teenagers do. But he would always say, boy, bad mood's a habit. And good God, I didn't realize it. It's a habit, right? And as you get older, and as your body starts to creak a little more, and your knees hurt a little bit more, and I mean, my mom likes to say that getting old ain't for sissies. As you get older, it's even easier to be in a bad mood, to be cranky about things. And once you start doing it, it becomes a habit. It becomes the way that you treat other people. You have to really put a focus on joy, on being joyful to other people and trying to enlighten their life. But to me, that's one of the worst habits. What do you guys think?
Well, one, happiness is a habit itself, right? Just on the, I mean, so I believe you can choose happiness with the right habits and the right pathway. You can be happy in any given situation.
A person who thinks they're sad, they're sad.
Right.
A person who thinks they're depressed. That doesn't mean all depression comes from that, but there's no doubt your vision of yourself is effectuated.
Yeah, and what I would say right now, and I'll speak for myself on this one, and then Jessica, I'll turn it to you. But bad habit is my phone. My phone is a bad habit. It attracts me. I look at it. I want to do something on it, whether it's read the news. I actually deleted all social media, but what I filled it. So the habit I thought was social media. What it was is it's just pictures, articles, whatever. So now I find myself just reading news like over and over and over again, whether it's ESPN or CNN or NPR or Fox News. Like I can go through them all.
Scroll back and start over.
Yeah, and then I just find myself reading news for entertainment, right? And so it's finding something to fill that time with. So a book is a great place to do that. Like rather than pick up my phone, go pick up a book and start reading. And now I'm in a different, I'm distracting myself from something, but I'm putting value. I see it as value added by reading a book. The other thing I did to help, and it is a bad habit, the phone. And the other thing I did is, now Samsung has this. I don't believe Apple has this, but on Samsung in the Android system, they have a setting where you can set it for nighttime, and whatever time you set it for, your phone goes black and white. And so I set it for 8:30 p.m. My phone goes black and white, and I have found that when you start to try to read news or anything in black and white, it's quite boring. And so looking at my phone, I find myself less apt to look at it. So it used to be 9:30, and then I moved it up to 8:30 because I'm like, no, I want it boring like earlier in the night. So that's how I'm trying to beat that a little bit. But man, that device is addictive, and it is a challenge.
Well, that was going to be when you asked the question, my immediate knee-jerk response was my phone. Checking my phone, compulsively checking my phone. I don't need to check my phone that often, especially after, after a certain time of the night. And I would say that if I was going to differentiate a little bit, I think one of my bad habits is not setting clear boundaries for myself from when one part of me and who I am starts and the other ends, or when it comes to, because right now, Guy and I were actually talking about this earlier, my professional life and my personal life are just entangled, and it works right now. But then I start asking myself, is it really working? Because there should be. And that's when we're talking about lying to ourselves. I'm lying to myself thinking that there shouldn't be some type of division and say, okay, this is a hard stop so I can attend to myself specifically and my family or my relationship in a way that's meaningful. And so it's kind of interesting. And so I was listening to both of you going, well, definitely my phone, because that's just, it's a constant, you're getting alerts and things like that. And then what I've tried to do is to start thinking, is it really that important? And so there's times, because I'll get, the only thing that comes to my Apple Watch are work emails. And so I'll just take off my watch at some point, because otherwise I'll check it. And so I have to create backstops for myself.
It buzzes on your arm.
Yeah, and so, but I've also gotten better at looking and going, that's a future Jessica problem. That's not a right now Jessica problem. And so then I'm kind of weaning myself off of that. So.
One of the wealthiest men that I know, I always try to figure out how people got to where they are, and I always try to figure out what setbacks they've had. But I also try to ask them, what's the most important advice that you would give? This individual, without exaggeration, only worked 3 to 4 hours a day, but he was intense. All right, he would go to work at 10. He'd work till about 11:30. He'd go to lunch. No cell phones. You couldn't have any electronics if you went to lunch with him. Then he would go back to work at 2. He'd work till 3:30, and then he would go do something at night. And he would watch me, and he'd realize I put in 16-hour days without thinking about it, especially during the time that I was mayor. And then I left, and I went into business and kind of did the same thing. My habits stayed the same. And I'll never forget him telling me, I said, so what do you think that I need to do to be able to be more successful financially? He goes, oh, God, you work way too hard to make money. And I was like, what? And he said, look, the single greatest thing that you have is right there. And he said, you're working it too hard. There's no way that you're going to be able to be successful by keeping that thing operating that long. He made his money by being intense in those 3 hours, but then spending the rest of the time gaining perspective and enjoying life and doing the things that he wanted to do. I can tell you, in watching him firsthand, he was incredibly successful at it. And I think we do that. I think that we all have a tendency to think the amount of hours that we work is what matters, as opposed to the intensity of hours, and then giving time back to ourselves.
And on that point of just giving time back to ourselves, when you think of a bad habit, where can you reflect on your own environment? So how you were raised, your own environment, and that can be your family, it could be where you grew up, all those, and what habits have you created out of that? And the reason I ask that is when I look at myself, I always, the book talks about identifying as something, whether it was an athlete or anything, right? And I look at myself and I say I'm Texan. I identify that I'm a Texan. And with that, a bad habit I developed with that is, as a Texan and as a man from Texas, you sacrifice everything to take care of everybody around you, and whether it's blood, sweat, tears, you just put it in. It was, you work on cars, you work hard, you put in long hours, whatever. And what I've realized is that habit actually didn't build success in the long term. Meaning, if I'm not taking care of myself, at some point I burn out. At some point I can't keep this up. I can't keep just saying I'm going to add more time or add more work or do it and just push through it so that I can take care of everybody around me. And so I had to reflect and have a little bit of an identity change on, okay, this habit that I've created is not helping. Meaning the habit I was creating was, what does everybody else need? Not thinking ever about, what am I doing for myself? And that's not selfish if it's in the aspect of, okay, I'm trying to make an improvement on myself or make something a little better so I can have incremental improvements and be here in the long run, right? Like if I can be here longer, I can be there for my wife, I can be there for my kids, I can be there around for other people, I can have an impact that lasts longer. And so that's something that I had to realize, where my environment was really shaping how I viewed myself. Can you think of a place where your environment maybe shaped a habit you have?
Yes. And so I was thinking, I believe, as a strong, independent woman, that I can do things on my own. I know I can. And so I think, which I think is a great mindset to have, but I also think where I struggle, and I think it's both personally and professionally, is asking and accepting help. And being able, because an offshoot of that is that I end up taking on too much, and that's where the burnout happens. And I don't necessarily have the mood pieces, but it's more of physical stress where I can't sleep, I get migraines, and that's where I can. And then I probably get a little cranky. But
Yeah.
I'm more am cognizant of just the discomfort that I feel, and so I won't jar myself out of it. Honestly, it takes someone else, whether it be my parents, my mom saying to me, well, why don't you ask your dad and I to do that? We can help you. And it's something silly like going to the grocery store to get, my favorite food that I like or something like that. And I thinking, I don't want to burden my mom and dad with that. But she's like, you have doing X, Y, and Z. And she'll kind of, whenever someone says, Jessica, you have a lot going on. And in my immediate response is to say, no, I don't. I can handle it. I don't have that much going on. But then when they say it, I pause and then I think of all the things that are happening at that moment. I'm like, well, maybe I do have a lot. And then I will slowly kind of say, okay, yeah, go ahead. Like that would be really awesome. Thank you. And even my boyfriend has said, you can ask me to do things for you. And I'm like, well, of course I can. But I realize I'm just kind of ripping through the routine or the things I got to get done. And then I have this person who's able and willing to help me. And it doesn't even register at times. And so I think being able to slow down and recognize that, being strong and independent also includes recognizing this is where I need help
Mhm.
and support. And I think I'm not always as good at that.
Vulnerability.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a tough one.
I mean, I know for me, that's an incredibly difficult thing to do is
Mhm.
to ask for help because
Yes.
that is a vulnerability. Directly on your point that you made a moment ago, there's a reason in an airplane that it says, hey, put the oxygen mask on yourself first, right? You have to do that. You cannot
Mhm.
be worried or ashamed about the fact that you have to take care of you first. Now, where that gets tricky is figuring out what is that? What does
Mhm.
that mean? Right. And so you could ask the question, well, what do I want? That in itself is tricky, right? That in itself becomes something that you have to spend time thinking about. What do I want? Here's what I found. I have found that people way too often look for happiness. Happiness is fleeting. If a family member that you have that you love passes away tomorrow, you're not going to be happy, nor should you be. All right. But even when that happens, you can have a sense of purpose and meaning. Now, when you start thinking about, well, what is that? What is purpose and meaning? You really only find purpose and meaning in four places. The first place that you find purpose and meaning is in who or what you love, right? And there it can make an incredible difference. And by the way, your frame of mind, free will plays into that. I love Viktor Frankl, Viktor Frankl, when he was in Auschwitz, he said that his family, people went to the left and one went to the right. He thought when he went to the right, they were going to kill him, but his family was dead within hours. He made a mission out of helping the other people inside this camp. And what he knew that he needed to give them was a sense of purpose. And there wasn't much. These people had gone down to 90 pounds. They were starving to death. They were in trouble and they were on the edge of life. So he taught them how to love a sunset. He said, we're going to work really hard. We're going to stay out there all day and we're going to watch that sun as it creeps underneath the horizon. And he said, if the Nazis knew that they were doing it, they'd have been beaten for it. But then when they'd go back into the barracks, he said they'd all talk about the colors, the reds or the oranges or the yellows or the clouds or whatever it was that had happened. They created a joint sense of connection. They could think of other people in the world that were watching the same sunset and what it meant to them. They learned to love the sunset when they had nothing else, right?
Yeah.
What you love is part of where you find meaning. Number two, you find meaning in what you create. Now that can be your music or your art. It can be your business. It can be what you do inside of a business. But what you create becomes part of your purpose. The third one is who you serve. It's we, not me. And when you service other people, you can find a sense of meaning. And the last one is for those people who are in the worst of conditions, the people who are struggling to make it, the people who are living in poverty or in Auschwitz or in prison, you can find it in struggle. Right? And oftentimes in struggle, you find it by helping other people, but you can find it in struggle. In fact, sometimes it's easier there to find it because for those of us who are living nice lives, we're still struggling with that first habit. What do I want? What do I want? Right? And again, what I have found is you have to think about when you're thinking about what do I want, well, what is meaning? What is it to me? And if it's those four areas, where in those four areas do I find my sense of meaning? Once you figure that out, everything else starts to fall into perspective. You know, in our business, we have a purpose. We are definitely cause-driven. That gives a life to the business that goes way beyond any bad day. It just does. The same is true in your individual life.
It's true. And I think when I reflect, one of the things that I had to look at in my mindset on that piece is when I would have a failure, or maybe when I viewed something as a failure, I could beat myself up over and over and over again, right? And I could find myself, like, I'll use an example. I want to go work out more, and then I sleep in a couple of days. And then I start to create a new habit of being upset that I didn't work out, that now I go down a path of that, right? Or I was going to read a book and I read a chapter and then it's been 3 weeks and I haven't picked up a book again. And now I'm beating myself up again. And the more I beat myself up, the more I find myself not wanting to do what I set out to do, right? And part of that is being okay with, okay, yeah, I didn't read the book for the last 3 weeks. All right, what do I want to do now? I want to read it. Let's pick it back up. Not a problem. Things happen. And that challenge, I feel it's human nature, it seems, to beat ourselves up sometimes because we have memory, we know it, we can relive the emotions of past, right? And so getting past that is definitely one thing that I have seen I have to work on, because I've had it where it was book Radical Candor by Kim Scott, and I was halfway through it. I enjoyed it, loved it, but I got so distracted with other things I didn't pick back up the book. And I felt like myself just mad, like almost upset that I'm not picking it back up and reading it, and like, what the heck? And, why? Why am I getting so upset? I enjoyed what I've read so far. I can go and read it later, and there's so many other things to get, you don't need to be upset about that, right? So part of it is we do have to work at that, right? Where have you found where you were able to push through something where you maybe had a habit you were trying to pick up and had to get over a hump to really adopt it? Is there something you've changed in your life?
Every day. Like if you want to know what I'm a master at, I'll tell you what I am world class at.
Yeah.
Humiliating myself. I am world class at that. And here's why. I grew up in a poor neighborhood. I had 9 brothers and sisters. We didn't have much.
Yeah.
I never look at things and feel like, oh gosh, what's the worst you're going to do? Take me back to the trailer park in Sunny Slope? Right? Yeah. The answer is, and I have to tell myself this, no. What you can't live with is not trying. So I try. And sometimes when I try, I humiliate myself incredibly. I'll go on air and I'll say something stupid. When I first ran for council, I could show you the interview. I still get red-faced over how bad I actually did in that interview, right? But by being willing to do it and do it over and over again, what I've learned at 63 is I wish I would have never, ever had any inhibition at trying things, at being willing to fail. I wasted time by not being willing to fail. At 63, what you start to learn is And I really think you start to learn this in your 40s and 50s. By the way, your 40s are better than your 30s, and your 50s are better than your 40s. I can't tell you yet whether the 60s will be better than the 50s, but I think they will be. But what you learn is, there's this, when you're at your guys' stage in your careers, you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I fit in? Where's my role? What's the place that I'm supposed to be? How hard am I supposed to work? And what you don't know is that there really is no construct. It's all illusory, every bit of it, right? It's just what you make it. That's all it is. And there's nobody. My dad used to tell me, I had a guy that came to the door one time. He was all filthy and dirty, and I wouldn't let him in the house. My dad came. He goes, "Why didn't you let that guy in?" I go, "Dad, that guy is a convict. He's filthy." He goes, "Son." So he brings him in and makes me get him a glass of iced tea. But when he leaves, he says, "What is your malfunction?" And I said, "Dad, give me a break." And he says, "No, I'm not going to give you a break." He said, "Look, if there's somebody south of you, that must mean there's somebody north of you. There's nobody north and south. They're just east and west at different levels of the horizon." Well, beginning to recognize everybody's the same. It just doesn't matter. And seeing yourself as an individual and recognizing, of course I mess up, and so will other people. They just maybe are better at covering it up, right? And besides that, why does it matter? What does it matter if they were perfect and I'm not? This is my experience and what I'm doing. You learn as you get older to quit struggling to try to fit in. You already fit in.
Oh, how about you?
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking of a time where I think it was it might have been right after I graduated with my doctorate. And then I can't remember what job I was at that point, but I remember almost having kind of an identity crisis of, okay, I have all this education and I know what I like to do, but I'm not certain. And so I started sending out job applications. I think in probably 6 months, I had sent out probably 95 resumes and worked really hard. And it was exhausting and I was getting nothing out of it. I think I ended up with 2 interviews. And so at that point, and I was really frustrated and I was really down on myself thinking, what's the point of everything that I'm doing? What's my path? I don't know what my path is. What do I want? And how am I going to figure this out? Because it's starting to feel I'm slipping into failure mindset and thinking like, well, what's the point of all this education that my parents pushed me to do if I can't even get a job doing what I think I'd like to do. But I knew at one point that I knew I always wanted to be in the industry where I wanted to help people, and that's important to me. And so I think pausing to identify that, and then I think at some point I just decided I'm not going to do this anymore because I was building, I think, a habit of submitting applications and then just being devastated or frustrated and thinking like, well, this is what I do now. And then one of my friends ended up reaching out to me and she said, "Oh, come help me with this contract work at this healthcare company." I said, "Okay, I'll do that." And then with that, I think when my focus shifted and I stopped, I think my attention was on the wrong thing. And that's not where it needed to be. I needed to expand almost my vision to say, where are the opportunities versus where aren't they? Because that's where I got stuck and like, well, there's none. And that's when I think when I was listening to you talk too, that there's almost an element of risk that you have to just decide, that you're in your mindset shift that you go, well, okay, this is the direction. I'm not entirely sure how to close the gap, but I just got to take a deep breath and go, okay, here I go. And then I think when I made that intentional decision, that's when opportunities popped up. And I happened to go to a council meeting and I ran into the CEO of a past nonprofit I had worked at. And she remembered me. And I was really, I remember feeling, I can still remember that exact moment and feeling, I was like, oh, that was a great moment. That was awesome. And then next thing you know, it ended up turning into a job that then kind of propelled me into a leadership position. But I can still very much, even in my physical being, remember how bad I felt when I was just perseverating on applications and realizing it didn't serve me at all.
So one habit might be being intentional in how you're, viewing things, right?
Right.
You're viewing it as, oh, this is just a negative side versus being optimistic.
Right.
what could be out there? What are the opportunities I could go for?
Mm-hmm. And also, this must be, I think, something I've gotten better at, because I think that must have been, I think, 6 or 7 years ago. But just asking myself, what are you doing? Almost I think bringing that pause and intention to say, okay, what's happening? How is this serving me? Is it or is it not? And then making an adjustment and just saying, okay, maybe now is not the right time. I want to rush to the next thing especially when we have an idea of what that next thing is, that we want to go get it, or that next goal. I realize that it's not always right now. And I think once I realized that it will happen, it just may not be right this second, that helped me kind of slow down and I think probably be a little bit more present too. But that was a mindset shift too, of just going, okay, I'm getting all these signs from my environment that's saying now is not the right time. And then the right time presented itself.
Yeah. And as I think to the book, I have to have a confession that there is a great part in the book about stopping biting your nails. And I was a nail biter, and I have stopped biting my nails since I read that passage in the book, using the same techniques in the book. So I will be excited and happy to show off my future nails as I have stopped biting.
Get a
them.
manicure now.
Exactly, that's what he does in the book, right? He gets a manicure. So I'll be excited for my first manicure that I've ever had. So always been a nail biter. But not anymore. See, so I would have identified, that was one of the things in the book, right? If you say you're a smoker, or I used to be a smoker, or whatever, versus, or I've quit smoking, or I've stopped, I'm a non-smoker. I don't bite my nails, right? Like, it's changing even how you view yourself.
I thought one of the values of the book was knowing, wanting, doing, and liking, breaking it down. And, we've just had a very long conversation about habits, much of which they cover in there. But what he does a really good job of is just giving you kind of a simple structure that is easy to execute on.
Right. And I believe we were talking, and you were talking to how it's almost a systems approach.
Yes.
Right.
So I'm a marriage and family therapist by training. And so all of the theories that we have in conceptualizing relationships are rooted in a systems theory, which kind of pulls out your process versus your content. And so as I was reading the book, there was a lot of, I was kind of assigning that meaning in my head. I said, oh, well, and he's talking about you need to work on your system or your process. I was like, oh, that makes sense, because that's what creates lasting change. Versus when I used to work with couples, if you get wrapped up in the content of the conversation, you're never changing the process of how they're having the conversation. And so I was able to really jump into this book really quickly, because a lot of it resonated with just that idea of looking at things in a system and how each piece kind of works together, and that's how you create change. And I was pretty pumped. I was being a nerdy therapist throughout the whole book.
Good for you.
So,
well, great. Well, when I think of this book for the book club, I think it was a great first step, because anyone who's out there who could be watching this, listening, this is a new habit. They just have an opportunity to start a new habit and start continuing to read books with us as we go along this journey and pick up some different ones. And it can be a habit to watch other videos of Optimistic American. It can be a habit to subscribe to the newsletter. These are all little choices that we can all make. And I think people don't realize that as we make those little choices, that they seem small now, but as you keep stacking them, they start to really have an impact down the road.
Definitely.
So I think that we can wrap it up today, and unless you have any final thoughts on the book and or habits.
I feel like I was being analyzed now that I know that she was.
What you didn't know is she just actually did a whole. She's gonna have a report afterwards
great.
Of how
Absolutely nuts.
And Guy too.
Guy too. Okay.
So thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Paul, for joining today. It was a pleasure communicating with both of you on this book. And thank you for watching. And I hope you enjoyed the content of today's discussion around atomic habits. If you would like to learn more about Optimistic American, or if you just want to be a part of this community, please push the subscribe button. Join our community and be a part of the Optimistic American.
Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. Now help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned. We can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.